Hello and welcome to Nighttime Biographies. On the night of January 7th, 1943, on the 33rd floor of the Hotel New Yorker in Manhattan, an 86-year-old man lay dying alone in room 3327. The maid who would discover his body the next morning had noticed the Do Not Disturb sign on his door for 3 days now, but something made her knock anyway. There was no answer. She used her key and entered. The room was spare, almost austere. A few books, some papers covered in equations and diagrams, scientific instruments arranged with mathematical precision. The man himself lay still on the bed, his body already cold. An assistant medical examiner would later determine that death had come around 10:30 the previous evening from coronary thrombosis, a blood clot in the heart. The man had died as he had lived his final years, utterly alone. This was Nikola Tesla, the man whose inventions lit the modern world, the genius who had once stood in laboratories crackling with artificial lightning, who had demonstrated wireless power transmission decades before anyone else imagined it possible, who had patents for more than 700 inventions, who had transformed the way electricity powers civilization itself. He died in a modest hotel room with unpaid bills, his most ambitious projects unrealized. Many of his ideas dismissed as the ravings of a man who had stayed too long at the frontier of possibility. The hotel where he died was magnificent, one of New York's grand establishments, but Tesla occupied only a small suite on the 33rd floor. He had chosen the room number deliberately, 3 and 3, the number divisible by 3. Everything in Tesla's world had to be divisible by 3. It was one of many compulsions that had grown more pronounced as he aged. On the nightstand beside him, crumbs from bread remained. Tesla had become a vegetarian in his later years, living on milk, bread, honey, and vegetable juices. His emaciated frame spoke of years of poor nutrition, of a man, too, absorbed in his visions to properly care for the vehicle that carried his extraordinary mind. Consider the strangeness of this ending. Here was a man who had corresponded with Mark Twain, who had dined with the wealthy and powerful, who had been celebrated on the cover of Time magazine, who had once been able to command the attention of the world's greatest investors. And he died alone, his body not discovered until morning, his last moments witnessed by no one. Within hours of the discovery, something remarkable happened. Federal agents arrived at the Hotel New Yorker. The Office of Alien Property Custodian, a wartime agency, seized Tesla's belongings. All of his papers, his notebooks, his scientific instruments, everything was removed from room 3327. The government was looking for something. Rumours had circulated for years that Tesla had invented a death ray, a particle beam weapon that could knock aircraft from the sky. In January 1943, with World War II raging across Europe and the Pacific, the United States could not risk such technology falling into the wrong hands. Tesla's nephew, Sava Kosanovic, a Yugoslav government official, arrived at the hotel to find his uncle's body gone and most of his possessions removed. The final indignity. Even in death, Tesla's ideas were considered too dangerous, too valuable, too important to be left to ordinary handling. But to understand how the father of electricity came to die alone in a hotel room, how a man of such brilliance ended his days feeding pigeons in Central Park and making grandiose claims that few believed, we must go back to the beginning. We must travel to a small village in the mountains of what would one day become Croatia, to a stormy night in the middle of the 19th century, when the modern world was still lit by gas and candles. Before we begin this journey through the life of one of history's most extraordinary and tragic geniuses, please take a moment to like this video and subscribe to the channel. I'm always curious to know where in the world you're watching from tonight, so please leave a comment. And now, settle in. The village of Smiljan sat in the mountainous region called Lika, in the military frontier of the Austrian Empire. It was 1856, and this remote corner of Europe seemed far from the centres of power and progress. The village was small, perhaps a few hundred souls, Serbs living under Austrian rule, their lives governed by the rhythms of agriculture and the Eastern Orthodox Church. On the night of July 9th, or perhaps just after midnight on July 10th, the records differ slightly, a tremendous electrical storm rolled through the mountains. Thunder shook the small houses. Lightning split the sky with such intensity that the darkness seemed to shatter into fragments of brilliant light. In a modest house next to the church, a woman was in labour. Her name was Georgina Mandic, though everyone called her Juka. She was the wife of Nikola Tesla, the local Orthodox priest, and this would be their fourth child. The labour was difficult, made more so by the violence of the storm raging outside. Lightning struck nearby, so close that the flash and thunder came simultaneously. At that exact moment, the baby was born. The midwife, a superstitious woman like most in the village, made the sign of the cross. "This child will be a child of darkness," she said, looking at the storm. "Born in such a tempest, surely this is an evil omen." Nikola Tesla, exhausted from labour but fierce in her defence of her newborn son, responded immediately. "No," she said, "he will be a child of light." They named him Nikola after his mother's father, who had also been an Orthodox priest. Nikola Tesla, the child of light, born in a storm of electricity. The world into which Nikola Tesla was born was on the cusp of transformation, though few in Smiljan could have known it. The year 1856 saw the end of the Crimean War, the founding of the Republican Party in the United States, the birth of Sigmund Freud. The Industrial Revolution was accelerating across Europe and America. Railroads were spreading like veins across continents. Telegraph lines were beginning to connect distant cities. The first oil well would be drilled in Pennsylvania just 3 years later. But in Smiljan, life moved according to older rhythms. The Tesla family lived in a world of orthodox tradition, of farming and livestock, of long winters when the mountain passes filled with snow and the village turned inward on itself. The Austrian Empire governed them, but their hearts were Serbian. Their language was Serbian. Their church followed the Serbian Orthodox rite. Their epic poems celebrated Serbian heroes and Serbian history. Nikola Tesla was not a simple village priest. He was an educated man, a graduate of a theological seminary, and he possessed a formidable intellect. He wrote articles for church publications, composed poetry, and maintained a library. That was extraordinary for such a remote location. He had volumes of philosophy, theology, mathematics, and literature. He read German, Serbian, and Greek, and he had strong opinions about nearly everything. Milutin was also a stern father who believed that discipline shaped character. He gave his children mental exercises, memory drills, puzzles designed to strengthen their reasoning abilities. These were not gentle games, but rigorous training. He would have his children memorize long passages of text, solve complex problems in their heads, engage in verbal debates where every argument had to be supported with logic. These daily lessons, Tesla would write decades later, were intended to strengthen memory and reason, and especially to develop the critical sense, and were undoubtedly very beneficial. Nikola Tesla was different. Where her husband was educated in formal institutions, she had never learned to read or write. But she possessed a different kind of genius, one that her son would inherit and expand beyond anything she could have imagined. Juka was an inventor. In an age when such a word was rarely applied to women, especially peasant women in remote villages, she created tools and devices that made household work easier. She invented kitchen utensils. better ways to weave thread, improvements to farming implements. She had a gift for seeing how things worked and imagining how they might work better. Her hands were always busy, always creating. She also possessed a prodigious memory. Despite being illiterate, she could recite thousands of lines of Serbian epic poetry, great rolling verses about medieval battles and tragic heroes. She had memorized them from listening to travelling singers and other villagers recite them. Her mind held entire libraries of oral literature. Tesla would later write of his mother, "My mother was an inventor of the first order, and would, I believe, have achieved great things had she not been so remote from modern life and its multifold opportunities. She invented and constructed all kinds of tools and devices and wove the finest designs from thread which was spun by her." The Tesla household was crowded. Nikola had 4 siblings. His older brother Dane, born in 1848, was considered extraordinarily gifted. Family stories suggested that Dane possessed a genius-level intellect, perhaps even greater than Nikola's would prove to be. He was the favourite, the brilliant firstborn son who would make the family proud. There were also 3 sisters: Milka, the eldest daughter, born around 1850, Angelina, born around 1852, and Marika, the youngest, born in 1858, when Nikola was already 2 years old. In 1861, when Nikola was 5 years old, something happened that would haunt him for the rest of his life. Dane Tesla died. The exact circumstances have never been entirely clear. The most common accounts suggest that Dane was killed in a riding accident, thrown from the family horse and fatally injured. But there are hints in Tesla's later writings, in comments made to friends, that perhaps young Nikola was somehow involved in the accident, that he witnessed it, or even inadvertently caused it. Tesla himself wrote very little about his brother's death, and what he did write is elliptical, suggesting guilt without ever stating it directly. Years later, he told a close friend that he felt he could never measure up to what his brother might have become, that his own achievements were somehow compensation for his brother's lost potential. The death of Dane transformed the Tesla household. Milutin, who had poured his hopes into his eldest son, now turned that intense focus onto Nikola. But the father's attention came with crushing expectations. Nikola was to be brilliant, to achieve greatly, to justify the family's suffering. And more than that, Milutin had decided that Nikola would follow him into the priesthood. The boy would become a minister of the Orthodox Church. For young Nikola, who was already demonstrating a passionate interest in mechanical things and natural phenomena, this was a nightmare. He had no desire to become a priest. His mind was drawn to questions of how things worked, to problems of physics and engineering, to the natural world and its mysteries. In 1862, the family moved to Gospic, a somewhat larger town where Milutin had been offered a better position. Gospic was still remote, still provincial, but it had more educational opportunities than Smiljan. Nikola began attending the local school. From his earliest years, Tesla displayed abilities that set him apart. His memory was eidetic, almost photographic. He could read a page of text once and recite it back perfectly. He could visualize objects in 3 dimensions with such clarity that he sometimes had difficulty distinguishing his mental images from reality. This last ability would become one of his greatest assets as an inventor. Tesla discovered that he could design and test entire machines in his mind. He would visualize a device, imagine it operating, note where it would fail, redesign it mentally, test it again, all without building a single physical prototype. Only when he had perfected the design in his imagination would he bother to construct it in reality. But in childhood, this gift was sometimes a curse. Tesla experienced vivid hallucinations. Flashes of light would appear before his eyes, sometimes so bright that he could not see the real world around him. Images would superimpose themselves on his vision, detailed and realistic. The line between his inner world and outer reality was sometimes frighteningly thin. The boy was also discovering his passion for invention, though his early efforts were sometimes as destructive as they were creative. One of his earliest projects was a device to catch frogs. He fashioned it from reeds and thread, a simple mechanism but one that showed his budding understanding of mechanical advantage. He became quite adept at catching the creatures, until one day he decided to test another theory. Nikola had observed that frogs' legs twitched when exposed to certain stimuli. He wondered whether eating frogs might provide some kind of energy or power to humans, the way food generally provides strength. He convinced several of his playmates to join him in consuming raw frogs. The experiment ended badly, with all the children becoming violently ill. It was an early lesson in the importance of proper experimental methodology. At age 3, Nikola had his first encounter with electricity, an experience that would shape his entire life. The Tesla family had a cat, a magnificent tom with thick black fur. Nikola loved the cat and would often stroke its back. One winter evening, in the dry air of the Croatian winter, something magical happened. As Nikola petted the cat, his hand produced sparks. Each stroke of the cat's fur generated tiny bursts of light in the darkness. The cat's back glowed with a blue aura, like some mythical creature from the Serbian folk tales his mother recited. Nikola was transfixed. "Why is this happening?" he asked his father. "What is the light?" Milutin, despite being a priest more concerned with theology than physics, provided the best answer he could. "It is electricity," he said, "the same force that creates lightning in the sky." The connection was instantaneous in the child's mind. The great powerful force that split the heavens during thunderstorms was somehow present in his own hand, controllable, producible through simple action. That evening, standing in the dark, stroking a cat and watching sparks fly, Nikola Tesla discovered his life's work. When he was 7 or 8, Nikola heard about Niagara Falls, the mighty waterfall on the border between the United States and Canada. His uncle had returned from a journey and described the enormous volume of water plunging over a cliff, the mist rising like clouds, the roar that could be heard for miles. The image captivated Nikola's imagination. That night, Nikola couldn't sleep. He lay in his bed, visualizing the falls, trying to comprehend the amount of water, the force it represented. And then, in the way that would characterize his entire approach to invention, he had a complete vision. He saw a great wheel being turned by the falling water, the rotation being converted into useful mechanical energy, perhaps even into electricity like the sparks he'd created with the cat. At breakfast the next morning, young Nikola announced to his family with complete conviction, "One day I will go to America and harness the power of Niagara Falls." His family smiled at the child's fantasy, but the vision would not leave him. For years afterward, Nikola would imagine that wheel turning endlessly, powered by the great falls. It became a sort of meditation, a mental image he would return to when he needed to calm his mind or focus his thoughts. Decades later, as a man of 39, Tesla would stand at Niagara Falls and watch as the first large-scale hydroelectric power station in history began operation, using his alternating current system to transmit electricity from the falls to Buffalo, New York, more than 20 miles away. The childhood vision had become reality. But in the years between the child's dream and the man's achievement, there would be tremendous struggle. As Nikola grew older, his unusual mental abilities became more apparent and more troublesome. He experienced vivid hallucinations, flashes of light so bright they would blind him temporarily. Images would appear before his eyes with photographic clarity, superimposing themselves on the real world. Sometimes these visions were beautiful, landscapes or faces. Other times they were terrifying. The line between his inner world and outer reality became frighteningly thin. Nikola learned to fear these episodes because he could not always distinguish what was real from what his mind was creating. A chair that appeared to be in front of him might be a hallucination, causing him to stumble when he tried to sit. A person who seemed to be standing in a doorway might vanish when he approached. His mother, Juka, noticed her son's struggles. She worked with him, teaching him exercises in concentration and willpower. She encouraged him to examine the visions carefully, to test them against reality, to develop methods for determining what was real. Nikola discovered that he could sometimes control the visions through intense concentration. If he focused his mind strongly enough, he could make the hallucinations fade. More importantly, he learned that he could direct his mental imagery, using it as a tool rather than being victimized by it. He began to practice visualization deliberately. He would imagine objects in 3 dimensions, rotating them in his mind, examining them from every angle. He discovered that he could create extraordinarily detailed mental images and that these images persisted. He could leave a mental model, think about other things, and return hours later to find his visualization exactly as he had left it. This ability would become one of Tesla's greatest assets as an inventor. In later years, he would design entire machines in his mind, visualize them operating, identify flaws in the design, modify the mental model, test it again, all without ever building a physical prototype. Only when he had perfected the design in his imagination would he bother to construct it in reality. And when he did, the physical object would work exactly as the mental model had predicted. But in childhood, this gift was as much curse as blessing, and young Nikola had to fight constantly to maintain his grasp on reality. The boy was also developing other peculiar habits that would stay with him for life. He became obsessed with counting. He would count his steps as he walked, always trying to make the total divisible by 3. He would count chews as he ate, ensuring each bite was processed exactly the same number of times. He counted the cubic capacity of soup plates and coffee cups, of food portions, of anything that could be measured or quantified. His teachers noticed these quirks, but also recognized his extraordinary abilities. Nikola could perform complex calculations in his head faster than other students could write them down. He memorized entire textbooks after reading them once. In mathematics, he would arrive at correct answers using methods that seemed intuitive rather than learned, mental shortcuts that he could not always explain to his teachers. But the conflict with his father over his future continued to grow. Every time Nikola showed interest in mechanical things, in how devices worked, in problems of physics or engineering, Milutin would redirect him toward religious texts and theological questions. The father was determined that his surviving son would follow him into the priesthood. The tension reached its peak when Nikola finished his elementary education in Gospic. The boy was ready for secondary school, and the question of which school and what course of study could no longer be delayed. Milutin, in what he probably thought was a compromise, arranged for Nikola to attend the higher real gymnasium in Karlovac. The school had a strong program in mathematics and science, but Milutin saw it as providing a good general education before seminary. Nikola saw it as an escape route, a chance to study the subjects he loved without constant pressure to become a priest. In 1870, at the age of 14, Nikola arrived in Karlovac and immediately felt that he'd been released from prison into paradise. The higher real gymnasium in Karlovac was a revelation. For the first time in his life, Tesla was surrounded by teachers who encouraged his scientific interests rather than suppressing them. The school had laboratory equipment, demonstrations of electrical phenomena, instruction in mathematics and physics that went far beyond what was available in Gospic. Tesla excelled. His teachers quickly recognized that they had an exceptional student. He completed mental calculations faster than his classmates could write them down. He memorized entire textbooks. In mathematics, he solved problems using techniques the teachers themselves didn't fully understand, arriving at correct answers through methods that seemed intuitive rather than learned. But the school also had something that would fascinate Tesla for the rest of his life: electrical demonstrations. One of his teachers showed the students a primitive electric motor, a device that converted electrical energy into mechanical motion. Another demonstration involved a static electricity generator that could produce sparks and charge objects. Tesla was entranced. Here was energy in its most mysterious form, invisible yet powerful, flowing through wires, creating light and motion, obeying mathematical laws that humans were only beginning to understand. The teenager became obsessed with electricity. He graduated from the Karlovac Gymnasium in 1873 at the age of 17, 3 years after starting. He completed the 4-year program early, distinguishing himself in every subject. His teachers wrote glowing letters to his father, praising Nikola as a student of extraordinary gifts. Tesla returned to Gospić for the summer, hoping to discuss his future with his father. He wanted to study engineering. He dreamed of attending university, of learning mathematics and physics at the highest level, of becoming a scientist or inventor. But before that conversation could take place, disaster struck. Tesla contracted cholera. The disease was still a major killer in the 19th century, a bacterial infection that caused severe dehydration through violent diarrhea and vomiting. Recovery rates were poor. Many who contracted it died within days. For months, Nikola lay in bed, his body racked by the disease. He grew emaciated, his skin taking on a grey pallor. The doctors told Milutin that his son would likely not survive. At one point, with death seemingly near, Nikola made a desperate appeal to his father. He begged Milutin to let him study engineering if he recovered. "Perhaps," the dying teenager whispered, "if you let me study engineering, I will get well." Milutin Tesla had already lost one brilliant son. The thought of losing another was unbearable. Standing at Nikola's bedside, the stern priest made a promise. "You will go to the best technical institution anywhere in the world," he said. The effect was immediate and remarkable. Whether it was the psychological boost or simply the natural course of the disease reaching its crisis point, Nikola began to recover. Slowly his strength returned. By autumn he was well enough to walk, though still weak and thin. But a new problem emerged. All young men in the Austrian Empire were required to serve in the military. Nikola was approaching the age when he would be called up for service. For a young man of his delicate health and intellectual temperament, military service would be a catastrophe. Milutin made a decision. He sent Nikola to hide in the mountains. For a year, from 1873 to 1874, Tesla lived as a fugitive in the mountains of Lika. He stayed with remote farming families, far from the authorities who might draft him. It was a strange interlude, a young man of extraordinary intellectual gifts living among shepherds and farmers, helping with harvests, sleeping in rough mountain huts. But Tesla later described this year as one of the most valuable of his life. Away from books and classrooms, he was forced to rely on his own mind for entertainment. He thought deeply about the problems of physics and engineering that fascinated him. He took long walks through the wilderness, observing natural phenomena, thinking about the principles that governed the natural world. He also strengthened his body. When he had arrived in the mountains, he was still weak from his bout with cholera. A year of outdoor work and simple living turned him into a much more robust young man. He hiked, climbed, swam in mountain streams. He regained his health and more. By the time he returned to civilization in 1874, the military had stopped actively searching for draft evaders from his cohort. He was able to avoid service, and Milutin kept his promise. In 1875, at the age of 19, Nikola Tesla enrolled at the Austrian Polytechnic in Graz, one of the finest technical universities in the empire. Tesla arrived at the Graz Polytechnic in the autumn of 1875 with his father's blessing and the weight of enormous expectations on his shoulders. The institution was rigorous, demanding, and exactly what Tesla had been dreaming of for years. He threw himself into his studies with almost frightening intensity. He attended lectures from 3 in the morning until 11 at night. He studied on Sundays and holidays. He slept only 4 or 5 hours each night. His professors were astonished by his work ethic, but some also worried that he was driving himself to exhaustion. Tesla excelled in every subject. Mathematics, physics, chemistry. He mastered them all with apparent ease. He could solve complex differential equations in his head. He memorized entire scientific texts. His examination scores were the highest in his class. But one particular demonstration would change his life forever. One of his professors, a man named Pigeon, was demonstrating a new type of electrical device called a Gram dynamo. This machine could generate direct current electricity, and it could also run as a motor. It was state-of-the-art technology for 1877. However, the Gram dynamo had a problem. It used a component called a commutator, a mechanical switch that reversed the current at specific intervals. The commutator sparked badly, creating electrical arcs that wasted energy and wore out the machine. Tesla, watching the demonstration, raised his hand. He suggested to Professor Pigeon that the machine could be improved by eliminating the commutator entirely. Couldn't the dynamo be made to run on alternating current instead of direct current? Pigeon was not pleased with the question. In front of the entire class, he delivered a scathing response. "Mr. Tesla may accomplish great things," the professor said, "but he certainly will never do this. It would be equivalent to converting a steady pulling force like gravity into rotary effort. It is a perpetual motion scheme, an impossible idea." The public humiliation burned itself into Tesla's mind, but rather than discouraging him, it became a challenge. For years afterward, Tesla would think about the problem of alternating current motors. How could you create a rotating magnetic field without mechanical commutation? The question became an obsession. Tesla's first year at Graz was brilliant. He won every academic honour available. His father received letters from the school praising his son as the finest student they had ever enrolled. But then something changed. In his second year, Tesla discovered gambling. A group of students had taken up playing billiards and cards for money, and Tesla joined them. Perhaps it was the mathematical element that attracted him, the calculation of odds and probabilities. Perhaps it was simple rebellion against his own rigid self-discipline. Whatever the reason, Tesla became addicted. He would gamble through the night, losing money he didn't have. He became skilled enough at billiards to win some of it back, but the net effect was financial and personal chaos. His grades began to slip. He stopped attending some classes. The professors who had praised him now sent concerned letters to his father. By the end of his second year, Tesla was in serious trouble. The third year was worse. He stopped attending classes altogether. He gambled compulsively, ran up debts, and became increasingly erratic. The school eventually informed him that he had not earned enough credits to continue. Milutin Tesla was devastated. His son, the brilliant student who had almost died of cholera and had been given a second chance, was throwing his education away. Tesla left Graz in shame in December 1878. He did not return home to face his father. Instead, he took a job as a draftsman in a small town called Maribor, hiding from his family and his failures. For nearly a year, Tesla worked in obscurity as a draftsman. He was paid poorly, lived in shabby rooms, and spent his evenings playing cards in taverns. It was perhaps the lowest point of his life. His friends from the university tried to locate him. His father, worried sick, sent messages trying to find where Nikola had gone. Finally, in March 1879, the Maribor police picked up Tesla for vagrancy. He had no residence permit for the town. They sent him home to Gospic. The reunion with Milutin was painful. The father had invested everything in this son. Nikola had thrown it all away. But before recriminations could fully begin, worse news arrived. Milutin Tesla fell ill. On April 17th, 1879, he died, possibly of a stroke or heart attack. He was 60 years old. Nikola Tesla was 22 years old. His father had died disappointed in him. His university education was unfinished and in ruins. He had no degree, no prospects, and the burden of knowing he had failed the man who had sacrificed so much to give him opportunities. The guilt would haunt Tesla for the rest of his life. But from this catastrophic low point, something remarkable happened. Tesla pulled himself together. He enrolled at Charles Ferdinand University in Prague, hoping to complete his education. He only stayed for one semester, but it was enough to restore some of his confidence. More importantly, he swore off gambling forever. The addiction had nearly destroyed him, but he conquered it through sheer willpower. He would never gamble again for the rest of his long life. In 1880, at the age of 24, Tesla moved to Budapest. A family friend, Ferenc Puskás, had offered him a job working on a new telephone exchange system that the American company Continental Edison was installing in the city. Budapest was a revelation. It was a real city, cosmopolitan and modern, with electric lights, telephones, newspapers, cafes where intellectuals gathered to debate ideas. For a young man from rural Croatia who had spent the previous years in provincial towns or mountain villages, Budapest was intoxicating. Tesla worked diligently at the telephone exchange, demonstrating the brilliance that had characterized his early university years. He made improvements to the equipment, showed initiative, and impressed his superiors. But something else was happening in his mind. He was still thinking about Professor Pöschl's words, about the impossibility of an alternating current motor. The problem had been churning in his subconscious for years. Then, one evening in February 1882, everything changed. Tesla was walking in a Budapest park with a friend, Antal Szigeti. The sun was setting, painting the sky with brilliant colours. Tesla was reciting Goethe's Faust from memory, as he sometimes did when walking. He came to a particular passage. The glow retreats, done is the day of toil. It yonder hastes, new fields of life exploring. Ah, that no wing can lift me from the soil, upon its track to follow, follow soaring. As he spoke those words, the solution came to him with such force that he stopped walking. His friend later described it as though Tesla had been struck by lightning. Tesla grabbed a stick and began frantically drawing diagrams in the sand of the path. He drew circles, lines representing magnetic fields, sketches of rotating coils. The entire design of a working alternating current motor had appeared fully formed in his mind. "See my motor here," he told his astonished friend. "Watch me reverse it." There, in a Budapest park, Nikola Tesla had solved the problem that Professor Pöschl had declared impossible. He had invented the rotating magnetic field, the principle that would revolutionize the generation and distribution of electrical power. He spent the next months refining the design entirely in his mind, visualizing every component, testing every configuration mentally until he was absolutely certain it would work. What Tesla had invented was this. Instead of using a commutator to mechanically switch the current, he would use alternating current itself. Multiple coils arranged around the motor would be energized in sequence by AC power, creating a rotating magnetic field. A conductor placed in the center of this field would be dragged along by the rotation, creating mechanical motion. It was elegant. It was simple. It eliminated the problematic commutator entirely, and it would work. But Tesla was a young engineer with no money, no laboratory, and no reputation. He had a world-changing invention in his head and no way to bring it into reality. He needed to get to Paris. In the spring of 1882, Tesla made his way to Paris and secured a position with the Compagnie Continentale Edison, the French branch of Thomas Edison's electric light empire. He was hired as a junior engineer, but his obvious talents quickly became apparent. The Edison company was expanding rapidly across Europe, installing their direct current electrical systems in factories, theatres, and wealthy neighbourhoods. These systems were based on DC generators that produced steady one-directional current, the same type of electricity that Professor Pöschl had demonstrated in Grèz. Tesla was assigned to troubleshoot problems with installations across Europe. He travelled to Strasbourg to fix a major electrical problem at a railway station. The work was successful, and Tesla used the opportunity to build his first physical prototype of the alternating current motor. He constructed it in his spare time, using materials he could scrounge or afford on his meagre salary. When he finally powered it up and watched the rotor spin smoothly without any commutator sparking, without any mechanical switching at all, he knew he had proven Professor Pöschl wrong. But when he showed his working model to his Edison Company colleagues, their response was disappointing. They were committed to direct current. They saw no value in this strange new approach. Some suggested he should abandon such impractical ideas and focus on the proven DC system. Tesla grew frustrated. He was convinced that alternating current was superior to direct current for long-distance power transmission, but no one would listen. Then one of his supervisors, Charles Batchelor, told him something that would change his life. "You should go to America," Batchelor said. "Take your ideas to Thomas Edison himself." Edison was the most famous inventor in the world. If anyone would recognize the value of Tesla's motor, it would be the Wizard of Menlo Park. Batchelor wrote a letter of introduction for Tesla. According to legend, though the exact wording is disputed, the letter said something to the effect of, "I know two great men. One is you, and the other is this young man." In June 1884, at the age of 28, Nikola Tesla boarded a ship for America. He carried almost no money, a few books, and the plans for inventions that would transform the world. The America that Tesla arrived in was a nation crackling with energy and change. It was the Gilded Age, a time of rapid industrialization, massive immigration, staggering wealth creation, and growing inequality. New York City was transforming into a vertical metropolis. The Brooklyn Bridge had just been completed the previous year. Electric lights were beginning to replace gas lamps in the wealthier neighborhoods. Tesla landed in New York on June 6, 1884, with just 4 cents in his pocket. According to the stories he later told, he had been robbed during the voyage, losing what little money he had brought, almost. Immediately, Tesla's problem-solving abilities were put to use. Walking through the city, he encountered a man struggling with a broken electric motor. Tesla offered to help, opened the device, diagnosed the problem, and repaired it on the spot. The grateful owner paid him $20, a fortune to someone with 4 cents. But Tesla hadn't come to America to fix broken equipment on street corners. He made his way to the Edison Machine Works at 65 Fifth Avenue in Manhattan and presented his letter of introduction. Thomas Edison was 37 years old, already internationally famous for his inventions of the phonograph and the incandescent light bulb, and deeply invested in his DC power distribution system. He was also a practical, hands-on inventor who distrusted formal education and theoretical knowledge. He believed in building hundreds of prototypes and testing them until something worked. Tesla was 28, formally educated in mathematics and physics, and convinced that the alternating current system he had designed was vastly superior to Edison's direct current approach. He believed in perfecting designs mentally before building anything physical. The two men could not have been more different. But Edison recognized talent when he saw it. He hired Tesla on the spot, putting him to work improving Edison's DC generators and solving technical problems with installations. Tesla threw himself into the work with his characteristic intensity. He redesigned key components of Edison's generators, making them more efficient. He worked impossible hours, arriving before dawn and staying long after other engineers went home. According to Tesla's later recollections, Edison promised him $50,000 if he could redesign the entire DC generation system and make significant improvements. Tesla took on the challenge. For months, he worked on new designs, filing patents, building prototypes, testing configurations. When he finally presented Edison with 24 new types of improved generators and numerous other improvements, Tesla asked for the promised $50,000. Edison, according to Tesla, laughed. "Tesla," he said, "you don't understand our American humor." The bonus was apparently never real, or Edison never intended to pay it. Tesla, furious at what he saw as betrayal, resigned from the Edison Machine Works in March 1885. He was 28 years old, in a foreign country, with almost no money and no job. Tesla's first year on his own in America was a disaster. He tried to interest investors in his AC motor and other inventions, but found little support. He was forced to take whatever work he could find. For a time, he worked as a common labourer, digging ditches for the installation of electrical lines. It was back-breaking work, paid poorly, and was far beneath his abilities. Here was one of the most brilliant minds in electrical engineering swinging a pickaxe for $2 a day. The foreman of the ditch-digging crew later recalled that Tesla would sometimes stop mid-swing and pull a notebook from his pocket to jot down an equation or sketch a diagram. Even while doing manual labour, his mind was working on problems of electrical engineering. But in early 1886, Tesla's fortunes began to change. He met two businessmen who were willing to invest in his ideas. They helped him establish the Tesla Electric Light Company in Rahway, New Jersey. The investors had their own agenda. They wanted Tesla to develop improved arc lighting systems for street lighting, an area where they saw immediate commercial potential. They were less interested in his AC motor, which they considered too experimental. Tesla designed several new types of arc lights and filed patents on them. The designs were innovative and the company had some initial success. But when Tesla insisted on pursuing development of his alternating current system, the investors balked. They wanted to focus on the profitable arc lighting business, not waste money on risky new technology. In a move that seems almost incomprehensible in retrospect, the investors forced Tesla out of the company that bore his own name. They kept his arc lighting patents and left him with nothing. It was 1886. Tesla was 30 years old. He had been in America for 2 years and had less to show for it than when he arrived. The AC motor that would revolutionize the world remained locked in his head and a few sketches in his notebooks. But Tesla's terrible luck was about to change. He was introduced to Alfred S. Brown, an engineer and superintendent of the Western Union Telegraph Company, and Charles F. Peck, a lawyer from Englewood, New Jersey. Unlike the previous investors, Brown and Peck actually listened to Tesla's explanation of alternating current. They understood that if his system worked as he described, it would be revolutionary. They agreed to fund him properly. In April 1887, the three men formed the Tesla Electric Company, with a laboratory on Liberty Street in Manhattan. For the first time in years, Tesla had the resources and freedom to work on what really mattered. Over the next year, Tesla designed and built multiple types of AC motors and generators. He filed for 30 patents covering his entire polyphase, alternating current system. The patents were granted starting in 1888. More importantly, Tesla began giving public demonstrations. In May 1888, he was invited to lecture before the American Institute of Electrical Engineers at Columbia University. His presentation, a new system of alternate current motors and transformers, was a sensation. The assembled engineers watched as Tesla demonstrated motors that ran smoothly with no commutator sparking, generators that produced multiple phases of alternating current simultaneously, and transformers that could step voltage up or down as needed. The system was elegant, efficient, and clearly superior to direct current for long-distance power transmission. One person in the audience was particularly interested, a representative of George Westinghouse. George Westinghouse was an inventor and industrialist who had made his fortune in railroad air brakes. He was now deeply involved in the electrical industry and had been searching for a better way to transmit power over long distances. Edison's DC system required a power plant every mile or two, because DC voltage couldn't be transmitted far without massive power loss. Westinghouse understood the fundamental problem with direct current. Electrical power is lost as heat when current flows through wires. The amount of loss is proportional to the square of the current. To transmit the same amount of power at lower current requires higher voltage. But Edison's DC generators couldn't easily change voltage levels. A generator that produced 110 volts would deliver 110 volts at the end of the line, minus whatever was lost to resistance in the wires. This meant that DC power plants had to be located close to their customers. A central station might serve customers within a mile radius, but beyond that the voltage drop made the system impractical. For a city like New York to be fully electrified with DC power would require hundreds of small generating plants scattered throughout the urban area. AC power solved this problem elegantly. Alternating current could be generated at 1 voltage, stepped up to very high voltage for transmission using transformers, sent over long distances with minimal loss, then stepped back down to usable levels for customers. A single large power plant could serve an entire city or region. Westinghouse had been experimenting with AC systems since 1885, and he had installed a few demonstration systems. But he faced the same problem that had bedeviled everyone who tried to develop AC power: motors. The electrical loads of the late 1880s were primarily lighting, which worked fine with AC, but there was growing demand for electric motors to power machinery. And nobody had a practical AC motor that worked reliably. Direct. Current motors were simple and well understood. AC motors existed, but they were inefficient, unreliable, and limited in their applications. This single technical problem was holding back the entire industry. Then Westinghouse's representatives attended Tesla's lecture at Columbia University in May 1888, and saw something that changed everything. Here was not just one AC motor, but an entire family of motors based on Tesla's rotating magnetic field principle. 2-phase motors, 3-phase motors, motors of various sizes and configurations, all operating smoothly and efficiently without commutators, without sparking, without the mechanical complexity that made DC motors expensive to build and maintain. Within days of the lecture, Westinghouse dispatched representatives to meet with Tesla. Initial negotiations were handled through intermediaries, but eventually Westinghouse himself travelled to Tesla's laboratory to see the inventions firsthand. The two men could not have been more different. Westinghouse was a practical businessman, focused on what could be manufactured and sold profitably. He had built his fortune not on revolutionary inventions, but on steady improvements to existing technology and astute business decisions. Tesla was a visionary who cared little for commercial considerations, more interested in the elegance of his solutions than in their marketability. But Westinghouse recognized genius when he saw it, and he was prepared to pay for it. In July 1888, after weeks of negotiations, the men reached an agreement. Westinghouse would pay $60,000 in cash for the rights to Tesla's AC patents. The money would be split, $25,000 to Tesla personally, $20,000 to his partners Brown and Peck, and $15,000 to purchase shares in the Tesla Electric Company. Additionally, and this was the provision that would later prove most significant, Tesla would receive a royalty of $2.50 for every horsepower of electrical equipment sold using his patents. At the time, this seemed like a reasonable arrangement. The $60,000 was a substantial sum, enough to set Tesla up comfortably. The royalty was expected to provide steady income, but not make him enormously wealthy. No one, neither Westinghouse nor Tesla nor anyone else involved in the negotiations, fully grasped how rapidly AC power would spread or how valuable those patents would become. Tesla also agreed to work as a consultant for Westinghouse Electric, spending time at the company's Pittsburgh facility, helping to adapt his inventions for commercial production. This proved to be one of the more difficult periods of Tesla's life. Tesla arrived in Pittsburgh in late 1888, expecting to work with engineers who would help perfect his motors for mass production. Instead, he found a corporate environment that valued standardization and cost reduction over innovation. The Westinghouse engineers wanted to modify Tesla's designs to use 133-cycle AC power, because that's what their existing generators produced. Tesla insisted that his motors worked better at 60 cycles, the frequency he had optimized his designs around. The conflict escalated. Tesla, who had never worked well in collaborative environments and who was absolutely convinced of the correctness of his own designs, clashed repeatedly with the Westinghouse engineering team. He was accustomed to working alone, perfecting designs in his head before building them, and having complete control over every aspect of his inventions. The compromises and committee decisions required in a corporate setting frustrated him enormously. After a year of increasing friction, Tesla returned to New York. His relationship with the Westinghouse engineering team strained, but his patents still securing him his royalty payments. Westinghouse ultimately built his AC systems using 60-cycle power, vindicating Tesla's insistence. But the experience left Tesla with a lasting distaste for corporate employment. But the agreement with Westinghouse triggered one of the most bitter technological and business battles in American history, a conflict later known as the War of the Currents. On one side stood Thomas Edison, deeply invested in direct current, his reputation tied to DC power distribution, his financial future dependent on the success of the Edison Electric Light Company. He had installed DC systems in dozens of cities, sold thousands of generators, built a business empire on the premise that direct current was the safe, reliable future of electrical power. On the other side was George Westinghouse, backed by Tesla's patents, betting his company's future on AC power. He had the superior technology, but Edison had the famous name, the established business relationships, and a willingness to fight dirty. Edison's campaign against AC was systematic and vicious. He published pamphlets warning that alternating current was too dangerous for home use. The higher voltages required for efficient AC transmission, Edison argued, made it a deadly threat to public safety. He distributed literature to newspapers describing theoretical accidents where children or workers might be electrocuted by AC power lines. When warnings alone didn't seem sufficient, Edison moved to public demonstrations. Starting in 1888, Edison and his associates began a series of gruesome spectacles designed to associate AC power with death in the public mind. Edison's employees travelled to towns where Westinghouse was proposing to install AC systems, bringing with them a portable generator and a collection of unfortunate animals. In public squares, Before crowds of townspeople, they would electrocute dogs, cats, and even horses using alternating current. The demonstrations followed a script. An employee would explain that this was the same type of electricity that would be running through the wires in your homes if you accepted Westinghouse's dangerous AC system. Then the animal would be led onto a metal plate connected to an AC generator. Another plate would be positioned to complete the circuit, and the power would be switched on. The animal would convulse, smoke rising from its body, and die in obvious agony. The public reaction was exactly what Edison wanted. People were horrified and began to associate AC power with danger and death. Local newspapers would print shocking accounts of the demonstrations, often accompanied by Edison's warnings about the dangers of AC. But Edison's most infamous contribution to the War of the Currents involved the development of the electric chair. In 1888, the New York State Legislature was debating how to make capital punishment more humane. Hanging was considered barbaric, prone to failure, and often resulted in slow, agonizing deaths. Various alternatives were proposed, and eventually attention focused on the possibility of using electricity. A committee was formed to study electrical execution. Edison, despite being publicly opposed to capital punishment, saw an opportunity to damage his rival. He testified before the committee, recommending that if New York State was going to execute criminals with electricity, they should use alternating current generators manufactured by Westinghouse. He helpfully provided technical specifications for how such a device might be constructed. Edison even coined a new term. Instead of saying someone was electrocuted, he suggested they should say the person was Westinghoused, directly associating his competitor's name with death. Harold P. Brown, an electrical engineer who worked closely with Edison, though not as a direct employee, became the public face of this campaign. Brown conducted additional animal experiments and provided technical advice for the development of the electric chair. He went so far as to secretly purchase Westinghouse AC generators through intermediaries so that the first electric chair would indeed use Westinghouse equipment. The first execution by electric chair took place on August 6, 1890. William Kemmler, convicted of murdering his lover with a hatchet, was strapped into the chair at Auburn State Prison in New York. The execution was botched horribly. The first shock lasted 17 seconds and failed to kill Kemmler, though it did render him unconscious. A second shock, lasting more than a minute, finally killed him, but not before his body had begun smoking and the smell of burning flesh filled the execution chamber. Witnesses were horrified. George Westinghouse, when informed of the details, reportedly said they would have done better with an axe. But Edison and Brown used even this disaster to promote their cause, arguing that AC was so dangerous it couldn't even reliably kill a man when that was the specific intent. Westinghouse fought back, but his responses were more technical and less sensational than Edison's attacks. He published articles explaining the science of electrical transmission, the safety advantages of AC when properly installed, and the superior economics of AC distribution. He pointed out that DC was just as deadly as AC at comparable voltages, and that the proper comparison was between well-designed AC systems and well-designed DC systems, not between AC at transmission voltages and DC at user voltages. But technical arguments carried less weight than burning dogs and electric chair executions in the court of public opinion. The battle might have continued for years, with both sides bleeding money in advertising and propaganda, except that events were about to overtake the combatants. The World's Columbian Exposition was coming to Chicago, and the contract to light the fair would be the most visible demonstration of electrical power ever attempted. The exposition's organizers needed massive amounts of electrical power to illuminate the fairgrounds and operate exhibits. This would be the largest electrical installation ever built. Millions of visitors from around the world would see whichever system was chosen. It would be a showcase that would influence electrical installations for decades to come. Edison's company submitted a bid to provide DC power for the entire exposition. The bid came in at $1.8 million, a staggering sum but reflective of the massive infrastructure that would be required. Multiple power plants would need to be built across the fairgrounds to supply DC power to all the buildings and exhibits. Westinghouse, using Tesla's AC system, bid $389,000. The difference was dramatic and reflected the fundamental advantage of AC power. Westinghouse could build a central power plant and distribute electricity throughout the fairgrounds, using transformers to step voltage up for transmission and down for use. The economy of scale was overwhelming. The exposition organisers awarded the contract to Westinghouse. When the fair opened in May 1893, more than 100,000 incandescent lamps illuminated the White City, all powered by alternating current generated using Tesla's polyphase system. 12 generators, each producing 1,000 horsepower, supplied power that was distributed through Tesla's system to every corner of the 600-acre fairgrounds. Millions of visitors attended the exposition over its 6-month run. They saw buildings lit so brightly they seemed to glow from within. They saw massive electrical motors driving machinery, all operating smoothly and efficiently on AC power. They saw a technology that worked reliably on a scale that DC could never match. The public verdict was clear. Whatever dangers Edison claimed for AC power, here it was, operating safely and magnificently in the most public demonstration imaginable. The arguments about animal electrocutions and electric chairs seemed suddenly irrelevant in the face of this gleaming, functioning testament to AC's superiority. But the final decisive victory for AC came not from an exposition, no matter how impressive, but from harnessing the natural wonder that Tesla had dreamed of as a child. Niagara Falls was about to become the ultimate proving ground for electrical power transmission. The Niagara Falls power plant began operation in 1895. Tesla's polyphase alternating current system transmitted electrical power from the falls to Buffalo, New York, more than 20 miles away. It was the largest power transmission project yet attempted, and it worked flawlessly. The War of the Currents was over. AC had won. By 1900, Edison himself quietly began converting his systems to alternating current. Tesla's royalties from the Westinghouse contract should have made him extraordinarily wealthy. At $250 per horsepower for every AC system sold, the payments would have totaled millions of dollars per year as AC spread across America and the world. But in 1897, Westinghouse ran into financial difficulties. The company was over-leveraged, facing demands from creditors, and the royalty payments to Tesla were a significant drain on cash flow. Westinghouse came to Tesla and explained the situation. If the royalty contract remained in force, the company would likely go bankrupt. If the company failed, AC development would be set back years or even decades. What would Tesla do? Tesla, in what may have been the most financially foolish decision of his life, tore up the contract. He accepted a one-time payment of $216,000 and forfeited all future royalties. He explained to friends that Westinghouse had believed in him when no one else would. He couldn't let that debt go unpaid. The royalties he forfeited would have made him one of the wealthiest men in America, likely worth billions in today's dollars. Instead, Tesla walked away with a modest sum and returned to his laboratory. By the mid-1890s, Tesla had become a celebrity. He was famous in scientific circles for his AC system, but he was also becoming known to the general public for his showmanship and his demonstrations of electrical phenomena that seemed almost magical. Tesla had discovered that high-frequency, high-voltage AC behaved differently from low-frequency power current. He could create spectacular displays of electrical arcs, discharge lightning from his fingertips, light bulbs held in his hands without any visible connection to a power source. His demonstrations at his New York laboratory became famous. He would invite journalists, wealthy patrons, and intellectuals to see his latest experiments. Among his friends and visitors were Mark Twain, Robert Underwood Johnson, and other luminaries of the age. One photograph from this period shows Mark Twain illuminated by one of Tesla's phosphorescent lamps, the writer's face glowing in the strange light. Tesla lived as a bachelor in a series of New York hotels. He dressed impeccably, dined in the finest restaurants, and maintained a routine that was both rigid and eccentric. He required exactly 18 napkins at each meal, arranged in a specific pattern. He would walk around a city block 3 times before entering a building. He counted his steps obsessively. Everything had to be divisible by 3. He was also developing an extreme phobia of germs. He would not shake hands. He would not touch anything round. The sight of pearls made him physically ill. Women's jewellery, especially pearl earrings, could send him into a state of distress. These compulsions were growing more pronounced as he aged, but they did not yet interfere significantly with his work. If anything, his rigid personal routine seemed to help him maintain the intense focus he needed for his research. In his laboratory, Tesla was pushing the boundaries of electrical science. He was experimenting with wireless transmission of electrical power, with radio waves, with X-rays, which he called his special rays, with high-frequency oscillations that could light up entire rooms without wires. Then, on March 13, 1895, disaster struck. A fire broke out in Tesla's laboratory at 3335 South Fifth Avenue. The building burned to the ground. All of Tesla's equipment, years of experimental apparatus, his notes, his prototypes, his models were destroyed. Tesla was devastated. He stood in the street watching the flames consume his life's work. Some of the most advanced electrical research in the world turned to ash in a few hours. But Tesla was not the type to surrender to misfortune. Within weeks he had secured new funding and was rebuilding his laboratory at 46 East Houston Street. By the end of 1895 he was conducting experiments again. It was around this time that Tesla became fascinated by the work of Wilhelm Röntgen, who had just discovered X-rays. Tesla conducted his own experiments and created some of the clearest X-ray images yet produced. He even took an X-ray photograph of Mark Twain, though the long exposure time required made it impractical for commercial use. Tesla was also increasingly interested in wireless transmission. Not just wireless telegraphy like Marconi was developing, but wireless transmission of electrical power itself. He believed that the Earth itself could be used as a conductor, that resonant frequencies could be established that would allow power to be transmitted through the ground to any point on the planet. It was an audacious vision, and it would lead him to make the most spectacular demonstrations of his career. In May 1899, Tesla relocated to Colorado Springs, Colorado, to conduct what would become the most spectacular electrical experiments ever attempted. He had convinced the El Paso Power Company to provide free electricity for his research, and he chose a site on the prairie east of the city, away from populated areas for obvious safety reasons. The laboratory Tesla built was unlike anything Colorado Springs had ever seen. The structure itself was a simple barn-like building, 80 feet square, with a roof that could be rolled back. But rising from its centre was an enormous mast, 200 feet tall, topped with a large copper sphere. This was not decoration. This was Tesla's instrument for playing with the forces that govern thunderstorms. Inside the building, dominating the centre space, stood Tesla's masterpiece, a massive resonant transformer that he called his magnifying transmitter. The primary coil was 51 feet in diameter, made of thick copper cable. The secondary coil, wound around a wooden frame, rose toward the ceiling like a tower of wire. When energized, this device could generate millions of volts of electrical potential. Tesla maintained a notebook during his Colorado Springs experiments, a diary of discovery written in precise handwriting, filled with calculations, diagrams, and observations. The notebook still exists, and it reads like the journal of a man who has discovered a new continent and is mapping it for the first time. His days followed a rigorous schedule. He would rise early, conduct calculations, and plan the evening's experiments, then spend his afternoons preparing equipment. The actual experiments could only be conducted after dark when the demand on the El Paso Power Company's generator was lowest, and they could provide him with the massive amounts of current he required. One of Tesla's first goals was to establish a standing wave in the Earth itself. He theorized that by sending electrical pulses into the ground at precisely calculated frequencies, he could create resonant waves that would circle the planet and return to their starting point. If this worked, it would prove that the Earth could act as a conductor for electrical power transmission. Night after night, Tesla sent pulses of electrical energy into the ground through a connection to the city's water pipes and his own underground grounding system. He used sensitive receiving equipment to detect the returning signals, and one night in June 1899, he detected it. A resonance, a pattern suggesting that his pulses were indeed circling the Earth and returning. Tesla was ecstatic. He had proven at least to his own satisfaction, that the Earth was a conductor, that it could be made to resonate like a bell, and that this resonance could be used to transmit power. But the most spectacular demonstrations came when Tesla activated his magnifying transmitter at full power. Local residents would gather at a safe distance to watch the show. When Tesla closed the switch in his laboratory, the copper sphere atop the mast would erupt with artificial lightning. The discharges were extraordinary. Streamers of brilliant blue-white electrical fire would shoot from the sphere, branching like natural lightning, sometimes reaching lengths of 135 feet. The crackling and snapping of the electricity was so loud that it could be heard clearly 15 miles away in the town of Cripple Creek. One evening, a group of businessmen from Denver came to see Tesla's apparatus in operation. They stood at what they thought was a safe distance, perhaps 100 yards from the laboratory. When Tesla energized the coil, the air itself seemed to come alive with electricity. The men felt their hair standing on end. Blue St. Elmo's fire danced on their watch chains and the metal buckles of their shoes. They could draw sparks from each other's bodies simply by extending a finger. Butterflies that flew near the laboratory had wings that glowed with blue halos, and one witness claimed he saw horses in a nearby field surrounded by coronas of light. Inside the laboratory, standing near his apparatus, Tesla himself became part of the electrical display. Streamers of electricity would extend from his fingertips to grounded metal objects. He could light an incandescent bulb by simply holding it in his hand, the electrical current flowing through his body harmlessly at the high frequencies his apparatus generated. Tesla developed a showman's instinct for these demonstrations. He would sometimes arrange for photographs to be taken, carefully timing long exposures to capture the spectacular electrical discharges. One famous photograph shows Tesla sitting calmly reading a book beneath his apparatus while artificial lightning crashes around him, filling the laboratory with brilliant light. The image was actually a double exposure. Tesla had posed for one photograph without the discharge running, then energized the coil for a second exposure with no one in the room. But the result created a powerful image of a man completely at ease with electrical forces that would kill anyone else. But beyond the spectacular displays, Tesla was conducting serious research. He had installed a receiving station 26 miles away from his laboratory in the mining town of Pikes Peak. At this station, he had 200 incandescent bulbs connected to a receiver tuned to his transmitter. When he energized his apparatus in Colorado Springs, the lights at Pikes Peak would glow, powered by wireless transmission of electricity across 26 miles of empty air and mountain terrain. The receiving equipment was remarkably simple, just a wire antenna and a tuned circuit, yet it received enough power to light 200 bulbs. Tesla saw this as proof of concept. If he could transmit power 26 miles with this experimental setup, imagine what could be done with a properly designed system on a global scale. Tesla was also exploring the Earth's electrical properties in other ways. During thunderstorms, he would take readings with sensitive instruments, measuring the electrical potentials in the atmosphere and the ground. He became convinced that natural lightning was essentially the same phenomenon he was creating artificially, just on a much larger scale, and he believed he could tap into the electrical energy of thunderstorms. One night in late June 1899, a massive thunderstorm approached from the mountains. Tesla set up his instruments to record the electrical activity. As the storm grew closer, his sensitive receivers detected increasingly powerful signals. Then, as the storm moved directly overhead, something unexpected happened. Tesla's instruments detected rhythmic patterns in the lightning discharges, signals that seemed to repeat at regular intervals. This was the beginning of Tesla's controversial claim to have detected signals from space. He observed patterns in the atmospheric electrical activity that could not be explained by random lightning strikes. The signals appeared to be deliberately ordered, arriving in sequences of pulses that suggested intelligent origin. Tesla initially thought he might be detecting electrical signals from another part of Earth, perhaps from electrical disturbances occurring on the opposite side of the planet. But as he studied the patterns more carefully, he became convinced they were coming from beyond Earth entirely, possibly from Mars or another planet. When Tesla publicly announced this observation in 1901, the scientific community reacted with skepticism bordering on ridicule. Serious scientists did not discuss communication with extraterrestrial beings. It was the stuff of sensational fiction, not respectable research. But Tesla never wavered in his conviction. He had observed something real in Colorado Springs, patterns that could not be explained by natural phenomena he understood. Whether these were actually signals from space, unusual atmospheric effects, or perhaps early detection of cosmic radio sources that would not be properly identified until decades later, we cannot know for certain. The experiments at Colorado Springs came to an abrupt end in August 1899. Tesla had been drawing massive amounts of electrical power from the El Paso Power Company's generator. During one particularly powerful experiment, Tesla's apparatus drew such an enormous surge of current that it created a power feedback through the system. The company's dynamo, unable to handle the massive and sudden demand, caught fire and was severely damaged. The power company was not pleased. They had provided Tesla with free electricity in exchange for his promise to share any commercially viable discoveries, but now he had destroyed their generator. They demanded compensation and immediately cut off his power supply. Tesla was forced to suspend his experiments. He spent the next several months trying to negotiate with the power company and seeking funds to continue his work. Eventually, realizing that he would not be able to secure more free electricity in Colorado Springs, he began making plans to return to New York. Before leaving, Tesla carefully documented all of his findings in his notebooks. He took detailed photographs of his apparatus and the effects it produced. He made calculations about what would be required to build a much larger version capable of global power transmission. In January 1900, Tesla departed Colorado Springs. The laboratory was left standing, though it would eventually be dismantled and the materials sold. But the 9 months Tesla had spent on the prairie had convinced him of something profound. Wireless power transmission was not just theoretically possible, It was practical and achievable. All he needed was sufficient funding to build the ultimate version of his magnifying transmitter. He had a vision now, crystal clear in his mind, of a great tower that would beam electrical power and communications to any point on Earth. It would be the crowning achievement of his life, the realization of all his dreams about bringing abundant electrical energy to every corner of the planet. What Tesla could not foresee as he boarded the train back to New York was that this vision would consume the next decade of his life, drain his fortune, and ultimately end in failure that would haunt him for the rest of his days. But in January 1900, returning from Colorado Springs with notebooks full of discoveries and a mind full of plans, Tesla was still optimistic. He believed his greatest triumph still lay ahead. He found it in the person of J.P. Morgan, one of the wealthiest and most powerful financiers in America. The meeting between Nikola Tesla and J.P. Morgan must have been remarkable. Tesla, the visionary inventor with dreams of free wireless power for all humanity. Morgan, the banker who had consolidated steel companies, railroads, and electrical utilities into monopolistic trusts. Tesla proposed to build a global wireless communication system. Morgan, impressed by Tesla's reputation and convinced there was money to be made in a wireless telegraph system that could compete with the transatlantic cable, agreed to invest $150,000 in exchange for 51% ownership of Tesla's radio patents. Tesla purchased 200 acres of land in Shoreham, Long Island, a site he chose for its proximity to both New York City and deep Atlantic waters. He named the facility Wardenclyffe. The centerpiece of Wardenclyffe would be a tower 187 feet tall, topped with a 55-ton, 68-foot metal dome. Below the tower, Tesla planned to sink a shaft 120 feet deep into the earth to improve electrical grounding. Construction began in 1901. The tower rose on the Long Island landscape and strange mushroom-shaped structure that locals found both impressive and unsettling. But Tesla had not told Morgan the whole truth about his plans. Yes, the tower would transmit communications, but Tesla intended it primarily as a wireless electrical power transmitter. He believed he could establish resonant frequencies in the Earth itself and beam power to any receiver tuned to the right frequency. Morgan had not invested in free wireless power transmission. He had invested in a commercial wireless telegraph system. When he discovered the true scope of Tesla's vision, he was furious. Moreover, in December 1901, Guglielmo Marconi succeeded in transmitting a radio signal across the Atlantic Ocean. Morgan's investment in Tesla's communication system suddenly looked obsolete before it was even completed. Morgan refused to provide additional funding. Tesla desperately sought other investors, but none were willing to take the risk. The Wardenclyffe Tower was never completed. The facility stood half-finished, a monument to abandoned dreams. By 1903, Tesla was in serious financial trouble. His patents on the AC system had begun to expire. The Westinghouse royalties were long gone. Wardenclyffe had consumed his savings and left him deeply in debt. In 1904, the United States Patent Office reversed its previous decision and awarded the patent for radio transmission to Marconi, despite the fact that Marconi's designs used components that Tesla had patented years earlier. This decision remains controversial, and the Supreme Court would eventually reverse it in 1943, after both Tesla and Marconi were dead. Tesla continued to work on turbines, improvements to his electrical systems, and various other projects. But the grand era of his major breakthroughs was over. He was approaching 50 years old, and the world was beginning to pass him by. In 1905, bankrupt and unable to pay his workers, Tesla abandoned Wardenclyffe. The facility sat empty for years, a slowly deteriorating reminder of what might have been. The tower was finally demolished in 1917 by the US government, which feared it might be used by German spies to communicate with submarines. The scrap metal from the tower sold for $1,750. For Tesla, it was the final indignity of a project that had consumed his fortune and his dreams. From 1906 onward, Nikola Tesla's life became a slow descent into obscurity and poverty. He moved from one New York hotel to another, frequently unable to pay his bills, leaving behind unpaid debts. He continued to work, to invent, to dream up new devices and systems. He filed patents for improved turbines, for systems to detect submarines, for vertical takeoff aircraft, for dozens of devices that exist only in patent documents. But without funding, without a laboratory, without the ability to build prototypes and demonstrate his ideas, Tesla could not bring any of these inventions to practical reality. In 1915, newspapers reported that Tesla and Edison would share the Nobel Prize in Physics. Tesla was reportedly furious at the prospect of sharing the honour with his old rival. The prize was ultimately awarded to neither man, going instead to William Henry Bragg and William Lawrence Bragg for their work on X-ray crystallography. Some historians believe Tesla refused the prize because he didn't want to share it with Edison. Others argue that the Nobel Committee simply reconsidered and chose different laureates. The truth remains unclear. In 1917, Tesla was awarded the Edison Medal by the American Institute of Electrical Engineers, the highest honour the organisation could bestow. Tesla was reluctant to accept an award named after Edison, but his friends convinced him that refusing would be petty. At the ceremony, Tesla delivered a speech outlining his vision of the future, including wireless power transmission and automation. But by then, few people were listening to Nikola Tesla's visions of the future. His eccentricities had grown more pronounced. The compulsions that had been manageable quirks in his younger years now dominated his behaviour. He counted everything compulsively. He became increasingly germophobic, wearing white gloves when leaving his hotel room. He avoided all social contact that might involve physical touching. And he developed an intense relationship with pigeons that became, in his final years, perhaps the most important emotional connection of his life. Tesla had always liked birds, feeding them in various parks throughout his life. Even in his busier years, when he was conducting experiments and meeting with investors, he would make time to bring breadcrumbs to the parks and feed whatever pigeons gathered around him. But in his later years, his connection to pigeons became an obsession that concerned his few remaining friends and mystified hotel staff who had to deal with the consequences. Every day, without fail, Tesla would walk from the Hotel New Yorker to the New York Public Library and to St. Patrick's Cathedral to feed the pigeons. Rain or snow, in summer heat or winter cold, the old man would make his way through the streets of Manhattan, carrying bags of bird seed and bread crumbs. He had specific routes, specific spots where particular flocks gathered, and he came to know individual birds. Tesla would spend hours watching the pigeons, studying their behaviour, noting their patterns. He gave names to some of them, could identify individuals by subtle variations in their markings. He spoke to them, carried on one-sided conversations, seemed to find in their presence a peace that human company could not provide. When pigeons were injured, which happened frequently in the dangerous environment of New York City, Tesla would take them back to his hotel room. He set up makeshift bird hospitals, fashioning splints for broken wings, nursing sick birds back to health, spending money he could barely afford on birdseed and medical supplies. The hotel staff received complaints from other guests about the bird droppings and feathers, about the cooing sounds coming from room 3327 at odd hours. But Tesla had lived at the Hotel New Yorker for years, and the management, knowing his financial situation was precarious, tolerated his eccentricity. They understood that the pigeons were not a hobby for Tesla, but something essential to his well-being. Tesla described one particular white pigeon with grey-tipped wings as special. He spoke of this bird with an intensity that went far beyond normal affection for a pet, or even the naturalist's interest in wildlife. To his few remaining friends who still visited him, he would talk about this white pigeon with an emotional openness he showed in no other context. "I have been feeding pigeons, thousands of them for years," he told one friend. "But there was one, a beautiful bird, pure white, with light grey tips on its wings. That one was different. It was a female. I had only to wish and call her and she would come flying to me." The friend listening to this felt uneasy. There was something in Tesla's voice that suggested he had crossed some boundary between the normal and the pathological. "I loved that pigeon as a man loves a woman," Tesla continued, "and she loved me. As long as I had her, there was a purpose to my life." It was a shocking admission from a man who had spent his entire life avoiding romantic or sexual entanglements, who had famously declared that celibacy was essential to his scientific work, who had never married, or even, as far as anyone knew, had a romantic relationship with another human being. Tesla described how the white pigeon would come to his window at the hotel, how she would fly into his room and land on his desk while he worked. He claimed that she understood him, that there was communication between them that transcended the normal relationship between human and animal. Then one day, the pigeon became ill. Tesla tried to nurse her back to health, used all his knowledge and resources to save her, but the bird's condition worsened. One night, as Tesla sat in his hotel room, the white pigeon came to his window for the last time. "I knew she was telling me goodbye," Tesla said, and then there came a light from her eyes, a powerful beam of light. "I knew she was dying, and when that pigeon died, something went out of my life. I have not been the same since." His friend, hearing this account, did not know how to respond. Was this a genuine mystical experience? A hallucination from an elderly man whose mind was beginning to fail? A metaphor for something else? Whatever the truth of the experience, it was clear that the death of the white pigeon marked a turning point for Tesla. After that, his public pronouncements became even more grandiose and disconnected from reality. His claims about his inventions grew more extravagant and less plausible. He seemed to be withdrawing further into a world of his own creation, a world where the boundaries between the possible and the impossible had dissolved. Psychologists and biographers who have studied Tesla's life have offered various interpretations of his relationship with the pigeons. Some see it as a displaced expression of the human connection he was unable to achieve, a safe way to experience affection without the complications and intimacy that human relationships would have required. His germophobia and compulsions made physical contact with humans difficult or impossible, but he could touch and hold birds without the same anxieties. Others suggest that Tesla's pigeon obsession was a symptom of increasing mental instability, possibly a form of obsessive-compulsive disorder that had worsened with age, perhaps early dementia or other neurological decline. There is also a simpler, more sympathetic interpretation. Tesla spent his final years in almost complete isolation. His friends were dead or estranged. His family was an ocean away, dealing with the chaos of World War II in Europe. He had no wife, no children, no close human companions. The pigeons were the only living creatures that depended on him, that responded to his presence, that provided any sense of purpose or connection. For a man who had once been celebrated in the grandest drawing rooms of New York, who had counted Mark Twain among his friends, who had dined with millionaires and lectured before the greatest scientific minds of his generation, the isolation of his final years must have been crushing. The pigeons, at least, still needed him. They still came when he called. They still depended on his daily visits. In 1937, When Tesla was hit by that taxicab while crossing the street on one of his nightly journeys to feed the pigeons, the immediate concern of his few friends was that he would no longer be able to make those walks. Who would feed the birds if Tesla could not? Tesla himself, lying in his hotel room with broken ribs and a severely wrenched back, refused to see a doctor. He also refused to stop his bird-feeding expeditions. As soon as he could walk, even if every step caused pain, he resumed his routes. The pigeons, he insisted, needed him. The room in question was 30/27 at the Hotel New Yorker. Tesla had moved there in 1934 and would live there for the final 9 years of his life. The hotel management allowed him to stay despite mounting unpaid bills, perhaps out of respect for his former fame, perhaps simply because he had nowhere else to go. Despite his poverty and isolation, Tesla continued to make pronouncements to the press, especially on his birthday each year. He would invite journalists to his hotel room and describe new inventions he claimed to have developed. In 1934, at age 78, he announced that he had invented a death ray, a particle beam weapon that could bring down aircraft at a distance of 250 miles, offered the device to various governments for defensive purposes, claiming it would make war impossible. The US War Department showed no interest. Neither did Great Britain or the Soviet Union. Whether the death ray existed in any form beyond Tesla's imagination remains unknown. In 1935, at his 79th birthday party, which had become an annual event where he held court with journalists, Tesla described an oscillating device no larger than a pocket watch that could, if applied to certain building structures, create resonant frequencies that would shake them apart. He claimed such a device could destroy the Empire State Building. The press reported these claims as the eccentric pronouncements of an aging inventor. Few took them seriously. Tesla's final years were spent in near-complete isolation. His few friends had mostly died or drifted away. His family in Europe was dealing with the outbreak of World War II. Tesla himself was cut off from the modern world by his eccentricities, his poverty, and his refusal to acknowledge that his greatest work was 4 decades behind him. He spent his days doing mental calculations, designing inventions in his head that would never be built, feeding the pigeons when he had the strength to walk to the park, and counting, always counting. Steps, napkins, the numbers on buildings, everything divisible by 3. At night, in room 3327, he would sometimes stand at the window and look out at the city he had helped to electrify, at the lights blazing in buildings across Manhattan, powered by alternating current, transmitted over long distances, made possible by the system he had invented more than 50 years earlier. Every light in New York was a testament to Tesla's genius, but the man who had made it all possible was dying alone, largely forgotten, in a modest hotel room. And so we return to where we began. On the night of January 7th, 1943, Nikola Tesla died alone in room 3327 of the Hotel New Yorker. He was 86 years old. The maid, Alice Monaghan, found his body the next morning. The Do Not Disturb sign had been on his door for 3 days. She had worried, and she was right to worry. An assistant medical examiner, H.W. Wembley, examined the body and determined that death had occurred around 10:30 p.m. on January 7th. The cause was coronary thrombosis, a blood clot in the heart. Given Tesla's age and his poor physical condition, it was not surprising. But what happened next revealed that even in death, Tesla's ideas were considered important and potentially dangerous. Within hours, the FBI arrived at the Hotel New Yorker. Agents from the Office of Alien Property Custodian seized all of Tesla's possessions. His papers, his notebooks, his scientific instruments. Everything was removed and taken into government custody. The official reason was national security. America was at war, and there were concerns that Tesla's papers might contain information about advanced weapons or other technology that could be useful to the enemy. Tesla's nephew, Sava Kazanovic, was a Yugoslav government official, and there were fears that Tesla's belongings might be sent to Yugoslavia, which was under Axis occupation. The government called in Dr. John G. Trump, a professor of electrical engineering at MIT and uncle of the future president, to examine Tesla's papers. After a 3-day review, Dr. Trump reported that the papers contained nothing that would constitute a hazard in unfriendly hands. Most of Tesla's notes, Trump concluded, were primarily of a speculative, philosophical, and somewhat promotional character, and did not include new, sound, workable principles or methods. The death ray, if it had ever existed, was not among Tesla's papers. Neither were plans for earthquake machines or wireless power transmission systems that actually worked. What the papers did contain were the thoughts and calculations of an aging genius whose mind had continued to race through problems of physics and engineering even when his body and his fortune had failed him. On January 10th, 1943, New York City Mayor Fiorello LaGuardia read a eulogy for Tesla over the radio station WNYC. The eulogy, written by Slovenian-American author Louis Adamic, celebrated Tesla's contributions to electrical engineering and his vision of the future. On January 12th, a funeral was held at the Cathedral of St. John the Divine in Manhattan. More than 2,000 people attended, a respectable number but far fewer than would have attended in Tesla's prime. The mayor was there. Some of Tesla's old friends and colleagues attended. Representatives from various scientific and engineering organizations paid their respects. But many of the people who had once surrounded Tesla, the wealthy patrons and famous friends, were absent. Mark Twain had died in 1910. Robert Underwood Johnson had died in 1937. Many others were dead or had forgotten the eccentric Serbian inventor. After the funeral, Tesla's body was taken to Ferncliff Cemetery in Ardsley, New York, where it was cremated. His ashes were initially stored in an urn at the cemetery. Years later, in 1957, Sava Kosanovic arranged for Tesla's ashes to be sent to Belgrade, Yugoslavia, where they were placed in the Nikola Tesla Museum. The museum also houses many of Tesla's papers, models and personal effects that were eventually released by the US government. Tesla died with debts totaling $7,980, a trivial sum for a man who had once helped to light the world. The hotel where he died was owed $2,500 for unpaid rent. Various creditors claimed smaller amounts, but he also died with more than 700 patents to his name, covering inventions that had transformed modern civilization. In the days following Tesla's death, obituaries appeared in newspapers around the world. Some celebrated his genius. Others focused on his eccentricities. Many struggled to assess his true legacy, to separate the revolutionary inventor of the 1890s from the eccentric old man of the 1930s. The New York Times published a lengthy obituary that acknowledged his contributions to electrical engineering, but also noted his increasingly erratic behavior in later years. The Times listed his major patents and achievements, but also mentioned his claims about death rays and communication with Mars. It would take decades for the full measure of Tesla's contributions to be recognized. For years after Tesla's death, his reputation faded. The electrical engineers who worked with AC power systems knew his name, but the general public largely forgot him. The narrative of electrical invention focused on Edison, Marconi, and other inventors who had been better at commercializing their work. But beginning in the 1960s, something changed. Engineers and historians began to re-examine Tesla's work and to understand the full scope of his contributions. In 1960, the International System of Units officially named the unit of magnetic flux density the Tesla in his honor. It was a recognition that came 17 years too late for Tesla himself to know about it. In the 1990s, a surge of popular interest in Tesla began. Books, documentaries, and popular histories rediscovered the man who had invented the modern electrical power system but died in poverty and obscurity. The Warden Cliff site, which had become a contaminated industrial property, was purchased in 2013 by a non-profit organisation working to turn it into the Tesla Science Centre. A crowdfunding campaign raised money to save the property from development. In 2003, two Silicon Valley engineers, Martin Eberhard and Mark Tarpening, founded an electric car company. They named it Tesla Motors, later shortened to Tesla Inc. The company's most famous investor and public face, Elon Musk, embraced the Tesla name as a symbol of electrical innovation and futuristic thinking. Today, the name Tesla is synonymous with electric vehicles and sustainable energy technology. Every Tesla car on the road is a rolling tribute to the inventor who died alone in a New York hotel room. But beyond the corporate tributes and the museum exhibits, Tesla's real legacy is woven into the fabric of modern life in ways most people never recognize. Every time you turn on a light in your home, the electricity flowing through the wires is almost certainly alternating current, distributed according to Tesla's polyphase system. Every electric motor in your appliances, from refrigerators to washing machines to air conditioners, operates on principles that Tesla discovered and patented in the 1880s. The wireless communication networks that connect the modern world, from radio to Wi-Fi to cellular phones, all descend from Tesla's pioneering work on high-frequency electromagnetic waves. Even technologies that Tesla himself never perfected, like wireless power transmission, are being developed today by companies exploring the ideas he first outlined more than a century ago. Tesla's life was marked by extraordinary contradictions. He invented systems that generated enormous wealth, yet he died in poverty. He was celebrated as one of the greatest minds of his age, yet he ended his life in obscurity. He envisioned a future of abundant, freely available energy, yet he struggled to pay his hotel bills. His personality combined astonishing brilliance with crippling compulsions. The same mind that could design complex electrical systems in its imagination, testing and perfecting them without ever building a physical prototype, was also the mind that could not tolerate the sight of pearl earrings or enter a building without walking around the block 3 times. Tesla never married, never had children, never formed the kind of close family bonds that anchor most lives. When asked about his decision to remain celibate, he once explained that his scientific work required all of his mental energy, and that romantic entanglements would have been a distraction he could not afford. Whether this was true, or whether Tesla's germophobia and compulsions made intimate relationships impossible, we cannot know. But the result was a man who died as he had lived for decades, completely alone. His relationship with the white pigeon suggests that perhaps he craved connection, companionship, love, but could only find it in the one relationship that made no demands on him, required no physical contact, and could be controlled entirely on his own terms. There is a profound sadness in Tesla's final years. Here was a man who had genuinely believed that his inventions would make the world better, that wireless power transmission would bring electricity to the poorest regions of the planet, that automation would free humans from drudgery, that technology guided by scientific understanding could solve humanity's greatest problems. But the world did not work the way Tesla believed it should. Wireless power transmission was not adopted because there was no way to meter it, no way to charge customers, no business model that made it profitable. His grandest visions remained unrealized, not because they were scientifically impossible, but because they were economically impractical. Tesla learned, too late, that genius alone is not enough. world is shaped not just by ideas, but by money, by business acumen, by the ability to navigate social and economic systems. And in these practical matters, Tesla was almost completely incompetent. He gave away fortunes and royalties. He destroyed contracts that would have made him wealthy. He invested his own money in projects that had no realistic prospect of commercial success. He alienated potential investors with his eccentricities and his unwillingness to compromise his vision. And yet, for all his flaws and failures, for all the loneliness and poverty of his final decades, Nikola Tesla changed the world more profoundly than most people ever will. Every light burning in every building on Earth tonight is, in some sense, a monument to the man who was born in an electrical storm in a Croatian village and died alone in a New York hotel room. In 1976, on the anniversary of Tesla's death, the Yugoslav-American Bicentennial Committee affixed a bronze plaque to the exterior wall of the Hotel New Yorker. The plaque, still visible today, identifies the building as the site where Nikola Tesla, one of the world's greatest scientists, died on January 7, 1943. It is not much of a memorial, a plaque marking where you died, not where you lived or worked or achieved your greatest triumphs. But perhaps it is fitting. Tesla's death was as solitary and unwitnessed as much of his later life. The plaque at least acknowledges that this obscure hotel room was the final stop on a remarkable journey. In Belgrade, the Nikola Tesla Museum houses his ashes in a golden sphere, surrounded by his papers, his models, his photographs. Visitors can see the actual components of his early AC motors, can read his correspondence with the great figures of his age, can trace the arc of a life that reached astonishing heights and tragic depths. But the real monuments to Tesla are not in museums or on plaques. They are in the power lines that crisscross continents, in the electric motors that drive modern industry, in the transformers that step voltage up for transmission and down for use, in the wireless communications networks that connect humanity across vast distances. Tesla's vision of a world connected by invisible flows of energy and information has largely come to pass, even if not exactly as he imagined it. We do not beam power wirelessly from central towers to receivers anywhere on Earth, but we do generate electricity at distant power plants and transmit it efficiently over long distances using his alternating current system. We do communicate wirelessly, using electromagnetic principles he helped to discover. The child of light, born in a storm, grew up to harness lightning itself. And though the man died alone and forgotten, his ideas pulse through the modern world like electrical current through copper wire, invisible but essential, unnoticed by most but animating everything. Nikola Tesla's story reminds us that genius is not enough, that vision without practical execution remains just dreams, that even the most brilliant mind cannot overcome the human need for connection and the mundane realities of money and business. But it also reminds us that ideas, once unleashed, take on lives of their own. Tesla may have died in poverty, but his inventions made the fortunes of countless others. He may have ended his life alone, but his work touches billions of people every day. In a 1915 interview, Tesla was asked about his philosophy of life. His response captured both his ambition and his ultimate resignation to solitude. What we want to do is to produce the useful. We do not need the light of the world. We want to have an understanding with the world, but this is impossible. I am a machine for thinking, nothing more. A machine for thinking. Perhaps that is how Tesla saw himself in the end. Not as a man with friends, family, emotional connections, but as a mechanism for converting the mysteries of nature into practical applications. A mind unburdened by the complications of ordinary human life. If so, it was a terrible bargain. He bought his extraordinary insights at the cost of ordinary happiness. He traded human warmth for electrical knowledge, and in his final years, counting his steps in sets of 3, feeding pigeons in Central Park, making wild claims that no one believed, he must have wondered whether the exchange had been worth it. But on this quiet night, more than 80 years after his death, we can say with certainty that the world is richer for Tesla's life, even if his own life was impoverished at its end. The lights are on because of him. The motors run because of him. The wireless signals carry because of him. If this journey through the extraordinary life of Nikola Tesla has moved you, please take a moment to like this video and subscribe to the channel. I would love to hear in the comments which aspect of Tesla's story resonated most with you. And now, as the night deepens and you prepare for rest, remember the man who lit the world but died in darkness, who saw the future clearly but could not navigate the present, who gave humanity the gift of abundant electrical power but ended his own life in a modest hotel room, counting steps and feeding pigeons and dreaming of impossible machines. Nikola Tesla lies at rest in Belgrade, his ashes contained in a golden sphere, his legacy written in lights that will burn long after all memory of the man himself has faded. Good night.